Hey folks, this is Sean, and this is a reading for the Library Socialist Book Club. We are reading the final piece of the chapter of Listen Marxist from Post-Scarcity Anarchism today. It's going to be a short reading compared to usual. It's only about a handful of pages that we haven't yet finished from this chapter. But last week the stream had been going on so long, we wanted to make sure that we gave everything adequate time. So generally and broadly speaking, welcome to the readings. We do readings every Thursday at, generally speaking, 20 GMT. Today we got started 20 minutes late because I had a really, really bad sleep last night, and technology's been a complete mystery to me today. So a little bit of behind the scenes magic. I've got badly burned hands right now, chemical burns from shopping during COVID-19, and one of two potential sources. I haven't confirmed where it came from, but I've got two strong leads of which cart I put my hands on that created chemical agitation, causing my palms to bubble over and bleed. It's been horrible. I didn't sleep well last night because it's also unbearably itchy. So make sure to wear gloves out there because during COVID, because if someone's overzealous with the antiviral disinfectants and doesn't follow the guidelines, the chemical guidelines for this sort of thing, you can end up being pretty badly inconvenienced by it. It sucks ass, and it's been like several days now like this. So, but I'm not here alone. I've also got a guest who's going to be reading with us, a member of the book club. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Alicia, and I'm just baffled by that story because, that's atrocious. I work at a grocery store, and I kind of laugh at folks who wear gloves a lot of the time because it's just like I see a lot of really bad glove hygiene. People are like, I'm wearing gloves, I am invincible. I did not think about like people putting chemicals on things and causing burns to other humans. But otherwise, I'm cool. It's all good. I'm looking forward to reading a book with you today.
Sweet, yeah. It was unexpected, the burn, and it's been nothing but terror so far. Well, it's no, I've not enjoyed it. So as a result, one of the things that's going to be slightly different this week is usually we have the text on the screen going along with us. Since it's only about 10 pages we have to read, and I was getting frustrated from so. I think I said this. I was like, I really only barely slept last night because I kept on waking up, scratching myself in my sleep. And like, I ended up getting up at like 3 or 4 in the morning and then just staying up because I was just like so done with this process of waking up, scratching, and sort of stuff for the day. So I got some calamine lotion and stuff. Anyways, I'm not at my full best technological self, and the process of setting up the streaming text was too hard for me, and I gave up on it. And we're starting 20 minutes late, and we're doing it without the text. But if you're reading along at home, we're starting on page 230 of the PDF version, which is up on the Library Socialist Wiki. We've got a link in the description of the YouTube channel. And we're starting at the header, The Two Traditions. And this will bring us to the end of this chapter, and we'll also read the note on affinity groups, which is a small addendum. So if you're reading along at home, it's the start of the header, The Two Traditions, at page 230 of Post-Scarcity Anarchism in the chapter Listen Marxist. Another sort of just maybe small thing to mention is that this is a live stream, so there's hiccups. We don't do a lot of edit. We don't do like editing on this stuff. It's supposed to be a resource to help people to be able to have a better chance to experience the text, either for the book club or in general, because these texts aren't available in audio form. But I recommend maybe listening at the speed of 1.25 if you're listening back later, or 1.5 depending on how fast you like to hear things, because there's going to be little stops and starts and stuff, and that's just part of the process. So maybe what I'll do is I'll get started here at the top of the Two Traditions, and then we can hand it off every page or so. We might have others who swing in partway through if it's anything like previous weeks. and we'll just try to make room for everyone to have a chance to read. So if you're watching along on YouTube or you found us through Twitter or something like that, and you are on the Seriously Wrong Discord server, you're invited to hop on and join and help us read. I think it's a good positive public service, and I also get something from it, like reading aloud in this context and hearing other people read aloud has really helped me to better grasp some of the points made in these texts. So I'm really happy to do it, and I'm really happy with how much of this book we've now committed to audio as an available form for people to participate in this discussion and thought. So I'll get started here. The two traditions. Oh, and first, I just want to say one more thing, one last little thing before we move on. This is a very polemical work against Marxists, in a sense. At the time that it was written in the 60s, Bookchin had renounced Marxism after a lifetime of being a Marxist to become an anarchist instead. It's a polemical work. It's sort of a fierce work. Something that came up in our first discussion group on this chapter was how it's alienating for some Marxists to hear something framed in such harsh critical terms. The thing that I would emphasize to our Marxist friends and to people who are maybe sympathetic to Marxism is that although this is a very sharply critical chapter, I think there is also a real love letter to Marxism at the same time. Bookchin is someone who understood and participated in Marxist communities for decades, writing this in his 40s at the advent of like the countercultural movement of the 60s. And I think many of his critiques of Marxism are things that can and should be integrated by intelligent, well-meaning, wholesome utopians, communists, and anarchists in the year 2020. So I'll just get started, but I guess I just wanted to say, it can be a little bit prickly and harsh sometimes, but I think it's really loving at the same time. So I just wanted to give that little context. The two traditions. It would be incredibly naive to suppose that Leninism was the product of a single man. The disease lies much deeper. See, this is why I felt the need to mention this, because this gets like really into it right away. Not only in the limitations of Marxian theory, but the limitations of the social era that produced Marxism. If this is not clearly understood, we will remain as blind to the dialectic of events today as Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky were in their own day. For us, this blindness will be all the more reprehensible because behind us lies a wealth of experience that these men lacked in developing their theories. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were centralists, not only politically, but socially and economically. They never denied this fact, and their writings are studded with glowing encomiums to political, organizational, and economic centralization. As early as March 1850, in the famous Address to the Central Council to the Communist League, they call upon the workers to strive not only for the single and indivisible German Republic, but also strive in it for the most decisive centralization of power in the hands of the state authority. Lest the demand be taken lightly, it is repeated continually in the same paragraph, which concludes, as in France in 1793, so today in Germany, the carrying through of the strictest centralization is the task of the really revolutionary party. The same theme reappears continually in later years. With the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War, for example, Marx writes to Engels, "The French need a thrashing. If the Prussians win, the centralization of state power will be useful for the centralization of the German working class." Marx and Engels, however, were not centralists because they believed in the virtue of centralism per se. Quite the contrary. Both Marxism and anarchism have always agreed that a liberated communist society entails a sweeping decentralization, the dissolution of bureaucracy, the abolition of the state, and the breakup of the large cities. Abolition of the antithesis between town and country is not merely possible, notes Engels and Anti-Düring, it has become a direct necessity. The present poisoning of the air, water, and land can be put to an end only by the fusion of town and country. To Engels, this involves a uniform distribution of the population over the whole country. In short, the physical decentralization of the cities.
The origins of Marxian centralism are in problems arising from the formation of the national state. Until well into the latter half of the 19th century, Germany and Italy were divided into a multitude of independent duchies, principalities, and kingdoms. The consolidation of these geographic units into unified nations, Marx and Engels believed, was a sine qua non for the development of modern industry and capitalism. Their praise of centralism was engendered not by any centralistic mystique, but by the events of the period in which they lived. The development of technology, trade, a unified working class, and the national state. Their concern on this score, in short, is with the emergence of capitalism, with the tasks of the bourgeois revolution in an era of unavoidable material scarcity. Marx's approach to a proletarian revolution, on the other hand, is markedly different. He enthusiastically praises the Paris Commune as a, quote, model to all the industrial centers of France. This regime, he writes, once established in Paris and the secondary centers, the old centralized government would in the provinces too have to give way to the self-government of the producers. End quote. And there's an emphasis at the end there on the self-government of the producers. The unity of the nation, to be sure, would not disappear, and a central government would exist during the transition to communism, but its functions would be limited. Our object is to not bandy about quotations from Marx and Engels, but to emphasize how key tenets of Marxism, which are accepted so uncritically today, were in fact the product of an era that has long been transcended by the development of capitalism in the United States and Western Europe. In his day, Marx was occupied not only with the problems of the, quote, proletarian revolution, but also with the problems of the bourgeois revolution, particularly in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Eastern Europe. He dealt with the problems of transition from capitalism to socialism in capitalist countries, which had not advanced much beyond the coal-steel technology of the Industrial Revolution, and with the problems of transition from feudalism to capitalism in countries which had scarcely advanced much beyond handicrafts and the guild system. To state these concerns broadly, Marx was occupied above all with the preconditions of freedom, including technological development, national unification, material abundance, rather than with the conditions of freedom, decentralization, the formation of communities, the human scale, and direct democracy. His theories were still anchored in the realm of survival, not the realm of life.
Once this is grasped, it is possible to place Marx's theoretical legacy in a meaningful perspective, to separate its rich contributions from its historically limited, indeed paralyzing shackles on our own time. The Marxian dialectic, the many seminal insights provided by historical materialism, the superb critique of commodity relationship, many elements of the economic theories, the theory of alienation, and above all the notion that freedom has material preconditions, these are lasting contributions to revolutionary thought. By the same token, Marx's emphasis on the industrial proletariat as the agent of revolutionary change, his, quote, class analysis in explaining the transition from a class to a classless society, his concept of the proletarian dictatorship, his emphasis on centralism, his theory of capitalist development, which tends to jumble state capitalism with socialism, his advocacy of political action through electoral parties, these and many related concepts are false in the context of our time, and were misleading, as we shall see, even in his own day. They emerge from the limitations of his vision, more properly from the limitations of his time. They make sense only if one remembers that Marx regarded capitalism as historically progressive, an indispensable stage to the development of socialism, and they have practical applicability only to a time when Germany in particular was confronted by bourgeois democratic tasks and national unification. We're not trying to say that Marx was correct in holding this approach, merely that the approach makes sense when viewed in its time and place. Just as the Russian Revolution included a subterranean movement of the, quote, masses which conflicted with Bolshevism, so there is a subterranean movement in history which conflicts with all systems of authority. This movement has entered into our time under the name of anarchism, although it has never been encompassed by a single ideology or body of sacred texts. Anarchism is a libidinal movement of humanity against coercion of any form, reaching back in time to the very emergence of propertied society, class rule, and the state. From this period onward, the oppressed have resisted all forms that seek to imprison the spontaneous development of social order. Anarchism has surged to the foreground of the social arena in periods of major transition from one historical era to another. The decline of the ancient and feudal world witnessed the upsurge of mass movements, in some cases wildly Dionysian in character, that demanded an end to all systems of authority, privilege, and coercion. And just a note on what it means to be wildly Dionysian in character. To be wildly Dionysian would be to drink lots of alcohol and party a lot. So these are not just liberatory movements he's talking about, but libertine movements that are made by scoundrels who resist authority, not just for ethical reasons, but also for self-preservation reasons, and also for the pursuit of joy and fun, etc.
The anarchic movements of the past failed largely because of material scarcity, a function of the low level of technology vitiated an organic harmonization of human interests. Any society that could promise little more material than equality of a poverty. I thought I could just launch into reading like this. I'm sorry. Any society that could promise little more material than equality of poverty invariably engendered deep-seated tendencies to restore a new system of privilege. In the absence of a technology that could appreciably reduce the working day, the need to work vitiated social institutions based on self-management. The Girondins of the French Revolution shrewdly recognized that they could use the working class against revolutionary Paris. To exclude radical elements from the sections, they tried to enact legislation which would end all assembly meetings before 10 p.m., the hour when Parisian workers returned from their jobs. Indeed, it was not only the manipulative techniques and the treachery of the vanguard organizations that brought the anarchic phases of the past revolutions to end. It was also the material limits of past eras. The masses were always compelled to return to a lifetime of toil, and rarely were they free to establish organs of self-management that could last beyond the revolution.
So on the word vitiate, I just looked it up. It means to be spoiled. Anarchic movements failed because a low level of technology spoiled the organic harmonization of human interests. So just wanted to clarify what that word means, because I also had no idea what it meant. And there was also, you're doing great first time reading. There was because we don't have the text on screen, I just wanted to emphasize the Girondins of the French Revolution shrewdly recognized they could use the working day against revolutionary Paris. I think you misspoke and said working class, but you're doing great.
You're right. I did misspeak and say working class instead of working day. Sorry.
No worries. But it's
that's an important distinction, though.
It is, yeah. That's the only. That's why I hopped in to let you to let our listeners know. But if you want to keep picking up from anarchists such as Bakunin, then
I'd love to. Thanks. Anarchists such as Bakunin and Kropotkin, however, were by no means wrong in criticizing Marx for his emphasis on centralism and his elitist notions of organization. Was centralism absolutely necessary for technological advances in the past? Was the nation-state indispensable to the expansion of commerce? Did the workers' movement benefit by the emergence of highly centralized economic enterprises and the indivisible state? We tend to accept these tenets of Marxism too uncritically, largely because capitalism developed within a centralized political arena. The anarchists of the last century warned that Marx's centralist approach, insofar as it affected the events of the time, would so strengthen the bourgeoisie and the state apparatus that the overthrow of capitalism would be extremely difficult. The Revolutionary Party, by duplicating these centralistic hierarchical features, would reproduce hierarchy and centralism in the post-revolutionary society. Should I continue? Bakunin, Kropotkin, and Malatesta were not so naive as to believe that anarchism could be established overnight. In imputing this notion to Bakunin, Marx and Engels willfully distorted the Russian anarchist views. Nor did the anarchists of the last century believe that the abolition of the state involved laying down arms immediately after the revolution to use... Sorry, reading the thing. Nor did the anarchists of the last century believe that the abolition of the state involved laying down arms immediately after the revolution. To use Marx's obscurantist choice of terms, thoughtlessly repeated by Lenin in State and Revolution, indeed, much that passes for Marxism in State and Revolution is pure anarchism. For example, the substitution of revolutionary militias with the professional armed bodies and and the substitution of organs of self-management for parliamentary bodies. What is authentically Marxist in Lenin's pamphlet is the demand for a strict centralism, the acceptance of a new bureaucracy, and the identification of Soviets with the state. The anarchists of the last century were deeply preoccupied with the question of achieving industrialization without crushing the revolutionary spirit of the masses and fearing new obstacles to emancipation. They feared the centralization would reinforce the ability of the bourgeoisie to resist revolution and instill the workers a sense of obedience. They tried to rescue all these pre-capitalist communal forms, such as the Russian mir and the Spanish pueblo, which might provide a springboard for a free society, not only in a structural sense, but a spiritual one. Hence, they emphasized the need for decentralization under capitalism. In contrast to the Marxian parties, their organizations gave considerable attention to what they called integral education, the development of the whole man to counteract the debasing and banalizing influences of the bourgeois society. The anarchists tried to live by the values of the future to the extent that it was possible under capitalism. They believed in direct action to foster the initiative of the masses, to preserve the spirit of revolt, to encourage spontaneity. They tried to develop organizations based on mutual aid and brotherhood, in which control would be exercised from below upward, not downward from above.
We must pause here to examine the nature of anarchist organizational forms in some detail, if only because the subject has been obscured by an appalling amount of rubbish. Anarchists, or at least anarcho-communists, accept the need for organization, and I'm going to jump into a footnote here, wherein we explain the term anarchist is a generic word like the term socialist, and there are probably as many different kinds of anarchists as there are socialists. In both cases, the spectrum ranges from individuals whose views derive from an extension of liberalism, the quote, individualist anarchists, the social democrats, to revolutionary communists, the anarcho-communists, the revolutionary Marxists, Leninists, and Trotskyists. So we're back. It should be as absurd to have to repeat this point, the point that anarchists, or at least anarcho-communists, accept the need for organization, as to argue over whether Marx accepted the need for social revolution. The real question at issue here is not organization versus non-organization, but rather what kind of organization the anarcho-communists try to establish. What the different kinds of anarcho-communist organizations have in common is organic developments from below, not bodies engineered into existence from above. They are social movements, combining a creative revolutionary lifestyle with a creative revolutionary theory, not political parties whose mode of life is indistinguishable from the surrounding bourgeois environment and whose ideology is reduced to rigid, quote, tried and tested programs. As much as it is humanly possible, they try to reflect the liberated society they seek to achieve, not slavishly duplicate the prevailing system of hierarchy, class, and authority. They are built around intimate groups of brothers and sisters, affinity groups, whose ability to act in common is based on initiative, on convictions freely arrived at, and on a deep personal involvement, not around a bureaucratic apparatus fleshed out by a docile membership and manipulated from above by a handful of all-knowing leaders.
The anarcho-communists do not deny the need for coordination between groups, for discipline, for meticulous planning, and for unity in action. But they believe that coordination, discipline, planning, and unity in action must be achieved voluntarily, by means of a self-discipline nourished by conviction and understanding, not by coercion and a mindless, unquestioning obedience to orders from above. They seek to achieve the effectiveness imputed to centralism by means of voluntarism and insight, not by establishing a hierarchical, centralized structure. Depending upon needs or circumstances, affinity groups can achieve this effectiveness through assemblies, action committees, and local, regional, or national conferences. But they vigorously oppose the establishment of an organizational structure that becomes an end in itself, of committees that linger on after their practical tasks have been completed, of a leadership that reduces the, quote, revolutionary to a mindless robot. These conclusions are not the result of flighty, individualist impulses. Quite the contrary. They emerge from an exacting study of past revolutions, of the impact centralized parties have had on the revolutionary process, and of the nature of social change in an era of potential material abundance. Anarcho-communists seek to preserve and extend the anarchic phase that opens all the great social revolutions. Even more than Marxists, they recognize that revolutions are produced by deep historical processes. No central committee makes social revolution. At best, it can stage a coup d'etat, replacing one hierarchy by another, or worse, arrest a revolutionary process if it exercises any widespread influence. A central committee is an organ for acquiring power, for recreating power, for gathering itself what the masses have achieved by their own revolutionary efforts. One must be blind to all that has happened over the past 2 centuries not to recognize these essential facts.
In the past, Marxists could make an intelligible, although invalid, claim for the need for a centralized party, because the
It's chill. It happens.
anarchic phase of the revolution was nullified by material society. Economically, the masses were always compelled to return to a daily life of toil. The revolution closed at 10 o'clock, quite aside from the reactionary intentions of the Girondins of 1793. It was arrested by the low level of technology. Today, even this excuse has been removed by the development of a post-scarcity technology, notably in the US and Western Europe. A point has now been reached where the masses can begin almost overnight to expand drastically the realm of freedom in the Marxian sense, to acquire the leisure time needed to achieve the highest degree of self-management. What the May-June events in France demonstrated was not the need for a Bolshevik-type party, but the need for greater consciousness among the masses. Paris demonstrated an organization is needed to propagate ideas systematically, and not ideas alone, but ideas which promote the concept of self-management. What the French masses lacked was not a central committee or a Lenin to organize or command them, but the conviction that they could have operated the factories instead of merely occupying them. It is noteworthy that not a single Bolshevik-type party in France raised the demand of self-management. The demand was raised only by the anarchists and the situationists. The need for a revolutionary organization, but its function must always be kept clearly in mind. Its first task is propaganda, to patiently explain, as Lenin put it. In a revolutionary situation, the revolutionary organization presents the most advanced demands. It is prepared at every turn of events to formulate, in the most concrete fashion, the immediate tasks that should be performed to advance the revolutionary process. It provides the boldest elements in action and decision-making organs of the revolution. In what way, then, do anarcho-communist groups differ from Bolshevik type of party? Certainly not on such issues as the need for organization, planning, coordination, propaganda in all its forms, or need for a social program. Fundamentally, they differ from the Bolshevik type of party in their belief that genuine revolutionaries must function within the framework of the forms created by the revolution, not within the forms created by the party. What this means is that their commitment is to revolutionary organs of self-management, not to the revolutionary organization, to the social forms, not the political forms. Anarcho-communists seek to persuade the factory committees, assemblies, or Soviets to make themselves into genuine organs of popular self-management, not to dominate them, manipulate them, or hitch them to an all-knowing political party. Anarcho-communists do not seek to rear a state structure over these popular revolutionary organs, but on the contrary, to dissolve all the organizational forms developed in the pre-revolutionary period, including their own.
I just want to pick up here on one thing that Bookchin said that I just want to underline, because he put something into words that I once failed to put into words when I did an episode of the podcast with Brett from Revolutionary Left Radio, who is, I guess, broadly speaking, say a Marxist-Leninist, and he had asked to distinguish anarchism from Leninism, and he had a way of describing it in terms of, rejecting the vanguard party as the defining criteria. But I think this distinction and that's clearly part of it, of what Bookchin's saying here. But the way that he says, fundamentally, anarcho-communists differ from Bolsheviks because their belief is that genuine revolutionaries must function within the framework of a revolution, not the framework of a party. And that distinction, I think, is such a brilliant turn of phrase, because it opens up the possibility of a million different potentialities of what a revolution could look like, and puts on us as revolutionaries who in the event of being able to find ourselves in a moment in history where there is a radical social change happening, that we need to be ready and fluid to address whatever shape that it takes. We need to be ready, not with preconceived notions of the structure that needs to happen, but we need to be ready to adapt to the realities of the revolutions of the future, which will take forms that I think are beyond our prediction. So I wanted to highlight that because it's such a beautiful little line before the reading picks up.
Isn't that kind of like saying that revolution requires the spontaneous action of the masses, basically? Like somehow everyone's thinking is going to shift?
Yeah, well, that's, I guess, what, because I think when he refers to the sort of like social and material forces, in saying like, anarchists know too well, I think part of what he refers to, or the way that Bookchin talks about it in this book, in other parts, is that there's not just the immiseration of the proletariat or the peasants that leads to an uprising, but it's the mixture between the immiseration, the misery, the toil, the removal from decision making, and the sense of the gap between what is and what could be. The idea of what could or should be, actually, I think more should. What should be, the feeling of what should be conflicting with what is one of the features of revolution. And I think he would, I'm hesitant to speak for him, but in the way that I would think of it is that that these are both sort of necessary conditions among other conditions that can lead to a revolution.
All right. Shall I continue reading?
I'll finish off this page so I can feel like I've done something today.
Okay.
I'll backtrack a little bit here so we can get it done properly. Anarcho-communists do not seek to rear the state structure over these popular revolutionary organs, but on the contrary, to dissolve all the organizational forms developed in the pre-revolutionary period, including their own, into these genuine revolutionary organs. The differences are decisive. Despite their rhetoric and slogans, Russian Bolsheviks never believed in the Soviets. They regarded them as instruments of the Bolshevik Party, an attitude which the French Trotskyists faithfully duplicated in their relations with the Sorbonne Students' Assembly, the French Maoists with the French labor unions, and the old left groups with the SDS. By 1921, Soviets were virtually dead, and all their decisions were made by the Bolshevik Central Committee and Political Bureau. Not only do anarcho-communists seek to prevent Marxist parties from repeating this, they also wish to prevent their own organization from playing a similar role. Accordingly, they try to prevent bureaucracy, hierarchy, and elites from emerging in their midst. No less important, they attempt to remake themselves, to root out from their own personalities those authoritarian traits and elitist propensities that are assimilated in a hierarchical society almost from birth. The concern of the anarchist movement with lifestyle is not merely a preoccupation with its own integrity, but with integrity of the revolution itself. And if you want, you can start with the footnote below.
In this goal, we may add that motivates anarchist Dadaism, the anarchist flip-out that produces the creases of consternation on the wooden faces of the PLP types. Oh man, there was some good alliteration there. The anarchist flip-out attempts to shatter the internal values inherited from hierarchical society, to explode the rigidities instilled by the bourgeoisie socialization process. In short, it's an attempt to break down the superego that exercises such a paralyzing effect upon spontaneity, imagination, and sensibility, and to restore a sense of desire, possibility, and the marvelous of revolution as a liberating, joyous festival. End of footnote. In the midst of all this confusing ideological cross currents of our current time, one question must always remain in the foreground. What the hell are we trying to make a revolution for? Are we trying to make a revolution to recreate hierarchy, dangling a shadowy dream of a future freedom before the eyes of humanity? Is it to promote further technological advance, to create an even greater abundance of goods than exists today? Is it to get even with the bourgeoisie? Is it to bring the PL to power, or the Communist Party, or the Socialist Workers' Party? Is it to emancipate abstractions such as the proletariat, the people, history, society? Or is it to finally dissolve hierarchy, class rule, and coercion, to make it possible for each individual to gain control of his everyday life? Is it to make each moment as marvelous as it could be, and the lifespan of each individual as an utterly fulfilling experience? If the true purpose of revolution is to bring the Neanderthal men of PL to power, it is not worth making. We need hardly argue the inane questions of whether individual development can be severed from social and communal development. Obviously, the two go together. The basis for a whole human being in a rounded society, the basis for a free human being is a free society. These issues aside, we are still faced with the question that Marx raised in 1850. When will we begin to take our poetry from the future instead of the past? The dead must be permitted to bury their dead. Marxism is dead because it was rooted in an era of material scarcity, limited in its possibilities by material want. The most important social message of Marxism is that freedom has material preconditions. We must survive in order to live. With the development of technology that could not have been conceived by the wildest science fiction of Marx's day, the possibility of a post-scarcity society now lies before us. All the institutions of a propertied society, class rule, hierarchy, the patriarchal family, bureaucracy, the city, the state, have been exhausted. Today, decentralization is not only desirable as a means of restoring the human scale, it is necessary to recreate a viable ecology, to preserve life on this planet from destructive pollutants and soil erosion, to preserve a breathable atmosphere in the bounds of nature. The promotion of spontaneity is necessary if the social revolution is to place each individual in control of his everyday life.
The old forms of struggle do not totally disappear with the decomposition of class society, but they are being transcended by the issues of a classless society. There can be no social revolution without winning the workers. Hence, they must have our active solidarity in every struggle they wage against exploitation. We fight against social crimes wherever they appear, and industrial exploitation is a profound social crime. But so are racism, the denial of the right to self-determination, imperialism, and poverty, profound social crimes. And for that matter, so are pollution, rampant urbanization, the malignant socialization of the young, and sexual repression. As for the problem of winning the working class to the revolution, we must bear in mind that a precondition for the existence of the bourgeoisie is the development of the proletariat. Capitalism as a social system presupposes the existence of both classes and is perpetuated by the development of both classes. We begin to undermine the premises of class rule to the degree that we foster the declassifying of the non-bourgeois classes, at least institutionally, psychologically, and culturally. For the first time in history, the anarchic phase that opened all the great revolutions of the past can't be preserved as a permanent condition by the advanced technology of our time. The anarchic institutions of that phase, the assemblies, the factory committees, the action committees, can be stabilized as the elements of a liberated society, as the elements of a new system of self-management. Will we build a movement that can defend them? Can we create an organization of affinity groups that is capable of dissolving into these revolutionary institutions? Or will we build a hierarchical, centralized, bureaucratic party that will try to dominate them, supplant them, and finally destroy them? Listen, Marxist. The organization we try to build is the kind of society our revolution will create. Either we will shed the past, in ourselves as well as in our groups, or there will be simply no future to win. New York, May 1969.
Wow. Well, great job reading, everyone. This was a really fun reading, and I'm just such a big fan of this piece. I said it last week, and I said it in the stream, and like my first comment is just there's so much beautiful things, and like there's so many beautiful. It's funny though because he's like it's like there's like 50% extremely I think just beautiful poetry about the necessity and structure of revolution, and it's like 10%, 5% shit posting about Maoists. There's one of the things that came up in the book club discussion for the first half of this chapter is how some of the pieces are. Oh damn! I might be on webcam, mic and mass. Some of the pieces of this, you can tell sort of come from a place of the traumatic experience that Bookchin had in his life in being like a member and participant, an active participant in the Communist Party for so long, and then coming to renounce it in this way. Some of the particular flourishes, I think, really come from a place of having, there's some personal turmoil here. But let's we're also going to read a note on affinity groups before we wrap up this week. But I wanted to give everyone a chance to, if they've got any parts they want to highlight from the reading or any clarifying questions or just something they wanted to bring up before we moved on.
I don't know. I just agree. The last little part that we read there, especially, was kind of heartening or something. Yeah, never mind.
No, I think that was great. Yeah, a good point. On the last page there, actually, it's an interesting question because he talks about. He raises an interesting question, I think, that's sort of very coming from this perspective of like this isn't just a piece of his political expression. It's also got some sort of like polemical. Well, it's very. I think the piece is overall actually quite praising of a lot of things about Marxism. One of the things that it's doing is just like really trying to stick it to the assumptions of Marxism and coming there at the end for the assumption that the workerness of workers is what makes them revolutionary, and instead turning that on its head to say, well, the workerness of workers is what is their role within the system. Like the system is built. Let's see how he phrases it. The social system presupposes the existence of both classes and is perpetuated by the development of both classes. We can undermine the premises of class rule to the degree that we can institutionally, psychologically, and culturally declassify. And saying that you want to remove a class understanding from revolutionary politics is a very, I think, intentionally hot take from Bookchin at the time. Like he was trying to get people to spit out their coffee and drop their copy of Workers' World News.
Mm-hmm. I that is a part of this chapter that I did really like because I'm not. I know I'm not as deep into like IWW stuff or whatever, but as some other folks that have talked about it are. But especially like growing up with like a union dad who's very much invested in the revolutionary potential of workers, and then turning that on its head and saying, "Nah, like that's just another identity that has been kind of imposed on you, and there are other lenses to look at this potential through," is really cool.
It reminds me of another thing that came up in the book club discussion yesterday on the first half of Listen Marxist, which is someone called this a hashtag no dads essay because Bookchin was symbolically, sticking it to his dad, which was Marx or Marxism, and he is the real like no dads anarchism of like is something that people were saying yesterday. And Mass, do you want to hop on to talk about that? What you dropped in the chat?
No, I'm good.
There are definitely some really good things that have come out of syndicalist organizing, obviously. But yeah, I do like the no dads thing. I missed that chat, but it sounds hilarious. Does somebody want to pick up on a note on affinity groups if we're wrapping this up? Wrapping this chat up, anyway.
I'd like to start it.
Great.
A note on affinity groups. The term affinity group is the English translation of the Spanish Grupo de Afinidad, which is, I'm sorry if I pronounced that bad, which was the name of an organizational form devised in pre-Franco days as the basis for redoubtable Federación Anarquista Iberica, the Iberian Anarchist Federation. The FIA consisted of the most idealistic militants in the CNT, the immense anarcho-syndicalist labor union. So let me repack that. I feel like I didn't say that in a way that it made sense. The FAI consisted of the most idealistic militants in the CNT, the immense anarcho-syndicalist labor union, and that's an end parenthesis, a slavish imitation of the FAA's forms of the organizational I'm sorry, one sec. A slavish imitation of the FIA's forms of organization and methods would neither be possible nor desirable. The Spanish anarchists of the 30s were faced with entirely different social problems from those which confront American anarchists today. The affinity group form, however, has features that apply to any social situation, and these have often been intuitively adopted by American radicals who call the resulting organizations collectives, communes, or families. The affinity group could easily be regarded as a new type of extended family, in which kinship ties are replaced by deeply empathetic human relationships nourished by common revolutionary ideas and practice. Long before the word tribe gained popularity in the American countercultural, the Spanish anarchists called their congresses assemblies de tribus, assemblies of the tribes. Each affinity group is deliberately kept small to allow the greatest degree of intimacy between those who compose it. Autonomous, communal, and directly democratic, the group combines revolutionary theory with revolutionary lifestyle in its everyday behavior. It creates a free space in which revolutionaries can remake themselves individually and also as social beings. And I'd like to hand it off. I can keep going. Affinity groups are intended to function as catalysts within the popular movement, not as vanguards. They provide initiative and consciousness, not a general staff of a source of command. The groups proliferate on a molecular level, and they have their own Brownian movement. Whether they link together or separate is determined by living situations, not by bureaucratic fiat from a distant center.
I can go.
Under conditions of political at the end of the paragraph.
Sure.
Under conditions of political repression, affinity groups are highly resistant to police infiltration. Owing to their intimacy of the relationships between the participants, The groups are often difficult to penetrate, and even if penetration occurs, there's no centralized apparatus to provide the infiltrator with an overview of the movement as a whole. Even under such demanding conditions, affinity groups can still retain contact with each other through their periodicals and literature.
During periods of heightened activity, on the other hand, nothing prevents affinity groups from working together closely on any scale required by a living situation. They can easily federate by means of local, regional, or national assemblies to formulate common policies, and they can create temporary action committees, like those of the French students and workers in 1968, to coordinate specific tasks. Affinity groups, however, are always rooted in the popular movement. Their loyalties belong to the social forms created by the revolutionary people, not to an impersonal bureaucracy. As a result of their autonomy and localism, the groups can retain a sensitive appreciation of new possibilities. Intensely experimental and variegated in lifestyles, they act as a stimulus on each other as well as on the popular movement. Each group tries to acquire the resources needed to function largely on its own. Each group seeks a rounded body of knowledge and experience in order to overcome the social and psychological limitations imposed by bourgeois society on individual development. Each group, as a nucleus of consciousness and experience, tries to advance the spontaneous revolutionary movement of the people to a point where the group can finally disappear into the organic social forms created by the revolution. That's the end.
That's really neat. And so affinity, one thing, a historical note is that the term affinity group was popularized in North America by Bookchin's note on affinity groups after he had, back then there wasn't a lot of like international travel of radical ideas, and people weren't as aware of what other people were doing. Within like the American anarchist scene, as it were, this is the introduction of the concept of affinity groups as the preferred term for this sort of thing. I'm really interested in the way that he describes the affinity group as having like this blurred, sort of blurring between a working group and familial ties, and like this sort of kind of like utopian anarchist and almost idea of like these little pods of people together who are doing revolutionary action together as like the organizational structure rather than like a vanguard party. It's
I read that as kind of queer too. Maybe because I just read everything as queer, but like the idea of chosen family being tied into affinity groups.
Oh, totally. I think that's a great, cross section. I think that there is a real like, if you combine some of a few of the implications across the 60s countercultural movement, Bookchin is sort of saying like you need to get like revolutionary polycules functioning out of like squat houses to form familial ties. I could see I could see a very queer reading of this for sure. Well, I want to say, y'all folks, these pieces together, although it's smaller than the usual text that we cover on the book club, there's a lot of really good shit piled all together across the two traditions. and the affinity groups thing. I think this is like a really, really great piece to study. I really look forward to talking about this in groups on next Wednesday. We're going to be doing it at 7 and 23 GMT on Wednesday, which, depending on where you are in the world, could mean a bunch of different things. But one of the things that it means for everyone is that you have two different options of a discussion group to participate in. And if you go to the Library Socialist Wiki page, which is linked under this YouTube video, it has a little translation guide that can give you an idea of where you're, what time of day these meetings are. So next Wednesday, we're going to be discussing this in a group, two groups. Usually we have between, say, like 6 to 20 people, depending on the time of day. And the discussions are always just absolutely fascinating. And the depth that I've been able to get out of these, reading through these texts with all these minds together, I can't overstate like how awesome it is and how fun it is and how much I hope to see you there. If you're someone who isn't on the Discord server or isn't a patron of the show, and you want to participate in this, when it comes to the book club especially, but I mean generally across the board, really don't want money to be a barrier for participation. So if you want to get in on the Discord and on the book club, just shoot us a message across any platform, and we'll make sure that you're able to get in and participate next Wednesday, and also these readings on Thursdays. So I guess if we can maybe just go through and some final thoughts on what we read today. I gotta say the part where, well, and also Aya, do you want to be referred to by your username, or is there a name that you go by?
Sai.
Okay, this is an example of something that's so cool about this book club. Sai hopped in midway through, helped us with the reading, did a killer job, and then I learned their name afterwards. and what's more post-scarcity anarchist than that? And what's more anarchist than all the little hiccups and stuff that come with the live format? You know, I feel like we're really showing, you know, we don't get to edit this. This isn't some perfectly orchestrated thing. This is just pure, spontaneous, vibrant readings of theory and reactions to it. But yeah, no, I thought you did a killer job, Sai, especially you hadn't read before, but also Alicia and Nmas also killed it as well. Like,
oh yeah, I appreciate you guys reading too. You guys did great jobs.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, and it's so great because every week, you know, people just hop on and we do it again. So if you want to be part of it next week, there in the audience comment section, watching this later, preparing for the next thing, it starts on Thursdays at 20 GMT. So that is 1 p.m. West Coast time, which is where I live. Starts at 1 p.m. West Coast time on Thursdays for the readings. So yeah, my final thoughts on this is I think that this is I really, really like this essay. I think if you pulled everything that is provocative out of this essay and tweak the wording a little bit, you'd have something that everyone around the world could agree is a perfect, wonderful essay. But it's so provocative in some places, and that's part of why I love it personally. Also, too, it's just like I do love that sort of like edgy anarchism. Pretty fun, pretty good. So yeah, those are my final thoughts, and I'll pass it up if folks want to say anything else before we cap off the stream.
I don't really have anything else to say except for that was very sweet and this was nice. The shortness of it was also nice. It's over. Not that the long conversations are not fascinating, but it's nice to get it over with, for lack of a better word, while everyone's still really energetic as well. And everyone's passion really spoke through today, I think.
I'd like to take a moment to thank any and everyone that's been involved in this thus far. If you go back and listen to the first reading, which I think is the second chapter, and go to now, I've definitely progressed just as someone that reads out loud, apparently. And I think it's helped me a lot. So if you have these same issues, I'd highly recommend hopping on and I don't know, just read a page. Why not? I also do like the fact that it shows that most people, this is not a normal thing most people do, is reading out loud or reading in front of people, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with it. So it's a nice community to just be able to do this with, and everyone's super supportive and just very chill and cool. So I highly encourage anyone that's nervous about it to just hop on.
I also just really appreciated the opportunity to participate. This reminded me a lot of school. These are things I haven't done since school, which was a long time ago. And it's really cool that it just gets to happen. Well, it doesn't just happen. People did it. But thanks.
And unlike school, when you mess up a word, the kids in the back of the class aren't laughing at you and stuff. So
Yeah, it's like unprecedented how nice everyone is. And it's hilarious that at the end of these readings and recordings, it just devolves into a big love fest. Everyone's like, man, that was so nice. Everyone is so great.
I think part of it is that people like we have this feeling like that we need to better grasp theory that we're supposed to be reading all the time and we're not. Like this is hanging debt. I'm just like, oh man, I need to read these things, and having a way to do it in a context that's social and where people are working together to clarify what's confusing about it too, because like we're not and like being able to talk about what is actually meant sometimes, not just like the text itself. Because I think there's this weird assumption underneath politics, this unstated assumption that we're all supposed to be like these perfectly formed political beings who show up and just like, oh yes, post-scarcity anarchism, I've read it 12 times, I've got it memorized or whatever, like, or just like this sort of like fake idea of like what the political process is like, and that's something I really like about this as well, is having like Enmas said, like the first time that we read it, at the beginning, Enmas was like pretty nervous, but then he became confident, and that was like the really cool thing to see, because it's like the way the world actually works. And it's the type of thing that you would edit out. It's the type of thing that me and Aaron do edit out when we're making a podcast. It's like we try to present it as like, here's the finished, perfect thing or whatever. And that's like sort of the weird expectation or the weird unconscious ideology. So being able to go into the live realm in a low stake sort of positive way to hit notes around theory and give voice to like authors and perspectives that we think have value. It's just great. So yeah, well, thanks everyone. Thanks everyone who's participated in the past as well.
yeah, I'd like to think that the entire live thing, it's like buying a homemade good. It's homemade. It's or handmade. There's craftsmanship to it, but it's probably definitely not perfect by any means. But it's perfect to you.
Yeah, just riffing on what Sean was talking about, especially around the idea that everyone needs to present themselves as this perfectly hardened anarchist or whatever group you're in. That's something that ultimately really alienated me in groups in the past. I, showing up in my early 20s to these anarchist circles, and especially surrounded by folks who were like working on PhDs or whatever, like very well read, and kind of this gatekeeper like snobbery around a lot of ideas really turned me off of participating in reading groups, and really just made me feel like an idiot in organizing meetings and that kind of thing. And it sucked. And like, not that this this online experience really changes that and is different in a lot of ways from being able to meet with folks locally. At least in my experience, a lot of what I've done is just local, but it's nice. Stop there for the sake of not getting too off topic and rambly.
I want to say that the first reading that we did here, I didn't expect it to actually be on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. I see you. You're there. But I didn't expect it to actually be broadcasted elsewhere. So Sean hopped on. I think it was that same day I was planning on doing it. Oh yeah, we're gonna live stream this and do all that stuff. Like, sure.
No, that's fine. You just talk into the void. Everyone and no one is listening.
It's like, that's fine. Oh, hey, there's this train that's about to hit me.
Not so much. I did radio for a while, and we kind of podcasted, but it fizzled out. It ended up. I think after a couple years of especially just doing radio and not engaging much on social media and podcast and that kind of thing, we were like, speaking into the actual void is a little bit overwhelming, exhausting, like not having audience feedback. So thanks YouTube for that. Sometimes there's some really interesting chats going on YouTube that folks highlight here.
Yeah, a shout out to one of the comments we got on YouTube in this time. They highly recommended Inhabit Instructions for Autonomy, which is they say a practical manifesto for disaster, anarchy, and communalism, and it's short and free to read online. So I don't know. I'm just gonna pass it on because I trust the wisdom of comment sections broadly in the world. It is called Inhabit Instructions for Autonomy, recommended by the comment section. This has been great. Let's say goodbye now to the people. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye YouTube.
Bye and thank you.
Oh, thanks as well. Yes.
Okay, so we're off now, and that was really great. I felt like I had something to say, but I also felt like I'm sort of tired today, and I kept on being like, oh, I can't remember what I was gonna say. Yeah, and then feeling like I'm gonna be an idiot on YouTube forever. Like. I was thinking that we might do something like right now they're set up as YouTube videos because that's the most sort of straightforward way to stream in a place that people are familiar with, and we can get an audience through our YouTube channel for it and stuff, which helps pull people into the book club. But there was someone in the chat talking about how they wanted to edit edit the oh no, they can still hear us. Oh yeah, it's just me. Yeah, oh man, that's funny. Hey everyone, I'm still over the music right now. We'll have to edit this.